Unwrapping the Pharaohs by John Ashton and David Down, Chapter 8. The Shoddy Pyramids. Egypt was going downhill. Kings still built pyramids, but they were shoddy affairs, piles of stones and rubble. They looked all right when finished because they were encased in shiny white limestone, but when stone robbers removed the casing, all that was left was the rubble. However, there was one bright spot. Unas, the last king of Dynasty 5, introduced writing into his pyramid, passages from the Book of the Dead to deter vandals from desecrating his tomb. In the Cairo Museum is a beautiful, larger than life size granite head of Ukersaf, first king of the 5th dynasty. He was the son of Neferhetepes, a daughter of the 4th dynasty king Dedefre. Most of the kings of Egypt seem to take life very seriously, but there is just the trace of a smile around the lips of Userkaf. It could have been the sculptor's idea, but maybe Userkaf was a friendly fellow. He chose to build his pyramid just outside the east wall surrounding the step pyramid. But it was a shoddy affair. Instead of layers of cut stone, the core consisted of a jumbled heap of stone piles up in the shape of a pyramid and then faced with limestone blocks. It looked all right from the outside. However, after the facing stones had been pilfered, only an untidy pile of stones remained. His pyramid was only 240 feet by 240 feet in area and 161 feet high, and beside it was a mortuary temple, a few blocks of stone strewn around it, all that remained of this structure, but it originally must have had some exquisite pictures in relief, some of which have been found. It was here also that the granite head of Userkaf was discovered. He seems to have ruled for less than 10 years. The subsequent kings of Dynasty 5 built their 4 pyramids at Abasur in between Giza and Saqqara. They also were untidy affairs which have not survived in good condition, but an interesting feature of these pyramids was the erection of sun temples associated with them, and some important writing documents have been found at Abasur. Userkaf was succeeded by Sahure. His mother is believed to have been Kentokas I, who in her tomb at Giza is said to have been the mother of 2 kings. His father probably was Userkaf. Sahure's pyramid was 256 feet square and 154 feet high, and from the pyramid a stone causeway goes down to the Valley Temple. A team from Czechoslovakia has been excavating here and in 1996 found that there were some interesting construction scenes depicted on the face of the stones which lined the causeway. There's no certainty as to how the millions of huge stones in Khufu's pyramid were elevated to their positions, and the construction scenes depicted, too, do not necessarily apply to the building of the larger Khufu's pyramid. However, since the 5th dynasty followed the 4th, in which is really big pyramids were built, it is likely that the same construction methods were used. One of the stones that has been recovered names 4 work gangs that were involved in the building. One of the gangs is actually portrayed pulling the ropes by which the huge blocks were moved. Another stone shows the fitting of the pyramidion top pyramid shaped block to the apex of the pyramid. Another block shows women dancing at the time of the fitting. The accomplishment was certainly something to dance about. All this still leaves a lot of unanswered questions, but any clues on the mystery of the pyramid buildings have to be cherished. In 1982, the Czechs found 2,000 pieces of papyrus written in hieratic, a pharaoh Ren-Phareph in his mud brick mortuary temple. Papyri were also found in the pyramid of Queen Khentos. They found 6 sun temples in the vicinity, but only 2 have been found. Over the last 30 years, a team of skilled archaeologists from Czechoslovakia have been methodically and patiently working on the site and recently made some spectacular discoveries. Naturally, some of the team members came from Czechoslovakia, but the last 16 years, Dr. Gay Callender of Sydney University has played a prominent role in these excavations. One area the team excavated was the funerary temple of the king's vizier, who apparently had some aspirations to royalty. One of the walls was mysteriously curved, and the archaeologists concluded that it had been made like that to accommodate the shape of the funeral boat, an object usually reserved for the king. There was also the cemetery of the royal princesses. Mummification sure does nothing for the beautiful looks of a princess, but then beauty was not the object of mummification. Primarily, it was to preserve the body so the deceased could enjoy the benefits of the afterlife. One unique find made at this site was the pyramidion, the point capstone, usually fit to the top of the pyramid. When it was complete, only three other capstones have been ever found. This one was made of black stone, but there was no trace of electrum gilding on the particular capstone. Electrum is naturally occurring alloy mostly of gold and silver, with traces of other metals. Another interesting find was the relief from King Hodai's causeway, showing army officers training their soldiers for war. Other reliefs were found depicting men of protruding ribs and emaciated bodies. Similar reliefs were found on the walls of the causeway of Unas, last king of the fifth dynasty, whose tumble-down pyramid at Saqqara. Scholars have interpreted these reliefs to mean that there was a severe famine in the land. Recent scholarships refute this interpretation. Dr. Callender claims that these were workmen who labored in the gold mines, which had narrow tunnels to work in. Naturally thin men would have been chosen for these jobs. She claimed that the Unas reliefs were merely copies of those earlier reliefs, for the squared lines for copying appeared on the Sahure relief. No doubt the most exciting find that resulted from the excavations at Abasir was the discovery of the tomb shaft of Iufa. A smaller shaft led to an intact tomb situated beneath the main shaft. The entire tomb was covered with religious spells and hymns, and decorated with fine vignettes and religious scenes. 82 feet down, at the bottom of the shaft, the Czechs found furniture, food, and models, including an astonishing 408 ushbitsis, small images of laborers working in the harvest field, intended to work for their master in the afterlife. In the burial shaft was the sarcophagus of Iufa, a, a later Egyptian priest and palace administrator. His name literally means he is great. Perhaps great in size, or meaning he would be destined for greatness, his tomb faces east instead of the conventional west, and his huge sarcophagus weighed more than 50 tons, with the lid alone weighing 22 tons. As Iufa probably died during the 27th dynasty, they concluded that this may have reflected Persian influence. Iufa's wooden coffin was in very fragile condition and tended to crumble at a touch, but it was carefully lifted from the tomb shaft with the intention of placing it on a jeep to take to the destination for further study. But the locals would have none of it. They proudly claimed that the Iufa was one of their noble's ancestors, and would carry his coffin on his shoulders all the way to the place where a more fitting vehicle, a panel van, was waiting. The last king of the fifth dynasty was Unas, who built his pyramid just south of the wall surrounding the steep pyramid. Most of the facing stones from his pyramid have been removed, but there is one area of the south side of his pyramid which has an inscription inscribed there during the 19th dynasty by Kamweset, who was the son of Ramesses II. Kamweset would have to be classified as the world's first archaeologist. He went around the country excavating and restoring monuments from earlier kings, and he tells of his activities in this inscription. Perhaps the most important feature of the Pyramid of Unas is the writing that is found on the walls of his tomb chamber and passages. He was the first pharaoh to introduce writing to his pyramid. The texts are in vertical columns of hieroglyphs and contain passages from the Book of the Dead, pronouncing curses on anyone who disturbs his tomb. Blue stars adorn the roof of his burial chamber, presumably to give the dead king the impression that he was under the night sky. From the east side of the pyramid, a causeway runs down to the Nile Valley. It is still paved with limestone blocks, and the lower portions of the walls are still in position. Originally, slabs of stone rested on the walls to make a roof. As it was necessary to admit light to this causeway, single slabs of stone could not be placed to span the gap between the walls, so two slabs of stone were used. They balanced on the stone walls, one half protruding beyond the other, and the other half over the causeway, not quite meeting in the center, so light could be admitted. Originally, the whole causeway was thus encased, but only a small sector is still standing. On the walls were reliefs showing women mourning over the dead, kings whose bodies had been floated from the Nile on the bottom of the causeway and then carried up the causeway to his tomb in the pyramid.